20 years, Holden was among the most loved car brands in Australia. On Monday, its parent company General Motors announced it's pulling the plug on the firm. It's closing down sales and design offices in the country and neighbouring New Zealand, and is also selling its factory in Thailand to China's Great Wall Motors.
GM tried everything to keep Holden going. We locally tried everything to keep Holden going until it was evident it would take good money after bad. So with heavy hearts, the most senior leadership of GM took the tough decision not to proceed with that investment proposal.
That's devastating news for its workers, around 600 of whom are being laid off.
Many of them, they're long-term workers who've been very loyal to the company. They've loved being a part of the car industry, and now with such an iconic brand coming to an end, it'll mean an end to their jobs.
And many Australians are sad to see the homegrown brand driving off into the sunset.
My pride and joy, first car, a 1962 Holden EJ Special, bought new by my Uncle Max and Auntie Jean, passed to me and driven all over Australia.
It's a sad day for Australia with the death of our very own car brand, Holden. Having given my heart and soul to Holden, I'm absolutely shattered.
We were a Holden family. First there was the Red Kingswood, then the Gold Premier, then the Blue Statesman DeVille, and finally the Statesman VH. I learned to drive in the DeVille. Thanks for the memories.
Prime Minister Scott Morrison says his government was blindsided by GM's decision.
They took money from Australian taxpayers for all those years just to let the Holden brand wither on their watch, I think is disappointing. And I think at the end of the day, it showed that throwing all that taxpayers' money at them, at the end of the day, they were never going to respect it at the end of the day.
But the writing's been on the wall for Holden for quite some time. The company halved domestic production back in 2013, instead choosing to import cars from its overseas plants. By 2017, it had completely halted production, axing nearly 3,000 jobs. And last year, GM said it was rolling back operations in the region. With car sales plunging globally, auto giants like Ford and Nissan are also slamming the brakes on production and laying off thousands of workers. Electric car maker Tesla is one of a few major brands whose sales are still accelerating. But given slowing demand and the lack of incentives for manufacturers in Australia, it's unlikely any major car manufacturer will be racing in to fill the void left by Holden. Mobin Nasir, TRT World.
Well, for more on this, Jim Saker joins us live now from Loughborough in the UK. He's a director at the Centre for Automotive Management. Welcome back to the program, Jim. Now, a bit of disclosure, the Holden Commodore was my parents' first car back in Australia, back in the 80s. So I can relate to this story somehow and to some of the emotion that's been felt down under in terms of this announcement from General Motors. But with production ending back in 2017, local production that is, was this almost inevitable in terms of General Motors pulling out of Australia?
I think you're exactly right. I think it was one of those situations where it was almost inevitable that they were going to have to do something about Holden. It wasn't a big enough market to really justify having a production, and also it costs a lot to maintain a brand in a country where the Holden brand was really just there and nowhere else in the world. So it's a big challenge for them, and they see that with their position. Their share value has been poor. They've only really got 4 major brands. Mark Roos used the excuse that right-hand drive was a problem, but in reality, right-hand drive, you've got certain ex-Commonwealth countries which still have that, including Japan. You've got South Africa, you've got India, you've got the UK. But you can't use that as an excuse for actually the failure of the company to be big enough to actually maintain and have enough budget to keep the Holden brand going.
Yes, let's look at that issue of the right-hand drive market. So I guess in simple terms, these are vehicles where the steering wheel is on the right-hand side of the car. Not all countries obviously drive on that side of the road. But why is General Motors pulling out of all those markets? Do you think that's a sensible decision?
Well, it's weak in all of those markets that have right-hand drive. So it's stronger in the US, It's stronger in Latin America. And so therefore, and Korea, these are markets that historically, GM has been strong in. And with a very limited brand spectrum that they now have, it is very difficult to justify putting money in to those brands that are not making the money and don't have a wider appeal than one particular country.
Now, meanwhile, car makers like Toyota, I mean, they're going gangbusters. Their sales are going really well in markets like Australia. Is it simply the right-hand drive argument? Is that simply an excuse for poor marketing, poor sales on General Motors' part?
I think it is, because Toyota have done particularly well globally, both right-hand drive and left-hand drive. But GM, you have to look at the bigger perspective. GM is struggling because it's a relatively small player now in a market which requires an awful lot of investment. New technologies are coming through, new powertrains, and you mentioned in your preliminary piece that Tesla's market valuation went above General Motors, and Tesla only have a very small number of cars on the road, but also a very small number of products available. And so therefore you're looking at this and saying, what the future is. How are GM going to raise the funds to invest in the future going forward? Toyota have been investing very, very heavily in new technologies. They introduced, obviously, the Prius in around about 2000. And so therefore they have a phenomenal advantage over companies that have historically gone for very large engines, very large vehicles, and therefore haven't had the money to invest going forward.
Okay, Jim Saker in Loughborough, thank you for your analysis as always.